You have tried everything. Not as a figure of speech, actually, genuinely, with real investment and real creativity and the specific, exhausting thoroughness of someone who believed that the right combination of effort and understanding would eventually produce the connection that kept almost materializing and then retreating. You tried presence and you tried space. You tried directness and you tried patience. You tried demonstrating your value through what you offered, the care, the understanding, the consistent warmth, the extraordinary quality of attention that you brought to understanding them more thoroughly than they understood themselves. None of it moved the needle in the way you hoped, and the confusion that produced, the genuine, disorienting confusion of someone who brought considerable intelligence and considerable care to a problem that considerable intelligence and considerable care did not solve, is worth examining honestly. Because the confusion is not evidence that you failed, it is evidence that you were working within a framework that did not accurately describe what you were dealing with. The framework said, show someone you care through what you do for them, and the caring will be received and will matter. The framework is not wrong in most relational contexts. It is wrong in this specific one. Because the avoidant does not primarily value what you do for them, cannot be reached primarily through what you do for them, is not at the level where genuine impact occurs, organized around the reception of effort and care as the currency of relationship. What they value is something different, something that cannot be performed or demonstrated through action, something that either exists in a person or does not, and that the avoidance system reads with a precision that bypasses all the effort entirely. What they value is authenticity. Not authenticity as a concept or a quality to be aspired to, or a presentation of realness. Authenticity in the specific, functional, psychological sense of genuine correspondence between interior and exterior, between what a person actually is and what they actually present, between the real and the offered. This requires unpacking because authenticity is a word that has been used so broadly and so loosely that its specific meaning in this context is in danger of being lost in the generality. What the avoidance system is reading for, at a level below the conscious assessment of character, in the specific involuntary threat detection function of a psychology organized around self-protection, is the degree to which the person in front of them is genuinely themselves, not performing themselves, not presenting a curated version of themselves designed to be received well, not strategically deploying qualities they possess in the interest of producing a particular response. Simply, genuinely, without the management that most social engagement requires, being who they actually are. This matters to the avoidant in a specific and foundational way, because the avoidant is themselves not genuine in this sense. They are managed. Their exterior is a deliberate, sophisticated, consistently maintained presentation that does not correspond closely to their interior. They know this, below the level of explicit acknowledgement. They live in the gap between what they present and what they actually are. And they have developed through years of inhabiting that gap, a finely calibrated sensitivity to the gap in others. When they encounter someone managed, someone whose presentation is calibrated and whose exterior is organized around reception, they recognize it. Not consciously necessarily, in the specific bodily precognitive way of a detection system that has been running its function for a long time. And the recognition is not comforting. It is, in its own way, confirming. Here is another person in the gap. Here is the familiar territory of managed engagement. Here is someone I can be in proximity to without the specific threat of genuine contact. When they encounter someone genuine, someone whose interior and exterior are in honest correspondence, who is simply what they are without the management, who responds to the world from their actual experience rather than from a curated version of their experience, the detection system does not find the familiar gap. And its not finding the familiar gap produces a response that is more complex and more significant than comfort or discomfort alone. It produces simultaneously the specific threat activation that genuine contact always produces in the avoidant, and the specific, involuntary, cannot be strategically generated pull toward something the interior recognizes as real. The pull is toward the authenticity itself, not toward the person as a collection of qualities or actions, toward the specific quality of genuine correspondence between interior and exterior that the person embodies, toward the experience of being in proximity to someone who is actually in the room, not performing being in the room, not managing their engagement with the room, but present in it with the specific, rare, nothing contrived about it quality of a person who has not installed a gap between themselves and their own experience. This is what the avoidant values, not because they chose to value it, because the detection system, for all its function as a protection mechanism, cannot suppress the recognition of what is real when real is genuinely in front of it. The recognition happens before the suppression can be applied. The pull exists before the management can redirect it. The practical implication of this is specific and important, and genuinely different from most of the advice available in this territory. Because most advice about reaching the avoidant is organized around doing things differently, communicating differently, pursuing or withdrawing in different proportions, demonstrating value more effectively or more subtly, offering things in forms the avoidant can receive without the threat response activating. All of that advice is organized around the modification of behavior in the service of producing a particular reception, which is to say, it is organized around the management of presentation. And management of presentation is the thing the avoidance detection system sees through immediately, is the thing that confirms, however sophisticated the management, that the person is operating in the gap rather than in genuine correspondence, is the thing that produces the familiar recognition and the comfortable distance rather than the genuine pull toward real recognition that only authenticity generates. What actually reaches the avoidant, what the avoidant actually values in a way that their system cannot manage its way around, is not any particular behavior. It is the quality that produces the behavior. The quality of being genuinely yourself, not as a strategy, not as the deployment of a real quality in the service of an intended effect, but as the simple, unmanaged, nothing aimed at any one expression of what you actually are. This sounds like it should be easy. It is not easy. Not for the empath who has been in the dynamic long enough to have absorbed some of the dynamic's logic, long enough to have begun, in the subtle and largely unconscious way that significant relational experiences shape behavior, organizing her presentation around what will be received, around what will not activate the retreat, around what will maintain the connection at the level where it is currently operating, rather than threatening it with the full, unreduced, take it or leave it quality of her actual self. That absorption is not failure. It is the ordinary, understandable, entirely human response of someone who is trying to maintain a connection in conditions that made the full version of her costly to the connection's survival. The management was adaptive. It made sense within the logic of the dynamic. And it is, in the honest assessment of what needs to change in order for genuine departure and genuine future connection to be possible, one of the things that needs to be gently, patiently, non-critically undone. The undoing is not dramatic. It is the small, daily, returning to herself work of noticing when the presentation is being calibrated for reception and choosing instead the genuine expression. When the response is being shaped by what will be well received rather than by what is actually true. When the self is being organized around the management of someone else's potential reaction rather than around its own honest experience of what is happening. Each noticing is an opportunity. Not for self-criticism, the management was understandable, and the path to less of it is through compassion rather than correction. But for the small, genuine, nothing performed about it return to what is actually true for her in the moment, what she actually thinks, what she actually feels, what she actually wants to say, from the place where what she wants to say is organized around honest expression rather than strategic effect. This returning, the practice of genuine correspondence between interior and exterior, is not only what the avoidant values, it is what everyone who is capable of genuine connection values, even when they do not have the language for what they are valuing. The quality of being in the presence of someone who is actually there, who is genuinely themselves, whose engagement is organized around honest expression rather than managed reception. It is, in fact, one of the rarest qualities available in ordinary social life. Most human interaction involves significant management. Most people, in most contexts, are presenting a version of themselves, the managed version. the one calibrated for the social environment, the relationship expectations, the ongoing project of being perceived in approximately the way they would prefer to be perceived. The empath's natural orientation, the genuine, reaches past the surface, responds to what is actually their quality of her engagement, is, when it is fully operating rather than partially suppressed by the adaptations the dynamic required, the expression of this rare quality. The quality of genuine presence, of authentic correspondence between interior and exterior, of being, simply and without management, actually herself. This is what reached the avoidant. This is what the detection system could not manage its way around. This is what the rejection was the terrified response to, and what the eventual falling was the honest reckoning with. Not what she did for them, not the care or the understanding or the consistent warmth or the extraordinary quality of attention. Those things were real and they mattered, but what they were expressions of was what actually reached the avoidant's interior, her genuine self, unmanaged, actually present, actually real. The single thing the avoidant values, beneath all the complexity of their defended psychology and their sophisticated management and their carefully maintained, self-sufficient exterior, is contact with what is real, with the genuine, with the correspondence between interior and exterior that their own psychology denies them, and that they cannot suppress the recognition of when they encounter it in someone else. They value it and they flee from it. The valuing and the fleeing are simultaneous, as has been traced throughout this entire examination. The genuine activates the threat response and the pull simultaneously, but the valuing is real, the recognition is real. The specific involuntary detection system response to encountering someone who is actually themselves is real. And she was that. She brought that. In the full, unstrategic, simply who she is sense of a person whose authenticity is not a quality she deploys, but a condition she inhabits. She did not fail because she failed to offer the right thing. She offered exactly the right thing. The avoidance capacity to remain in the presence of it was what was insufficient, not what she offered, what they were capable of receiving. Those are different failures. Only one of them is hers. And it is not the one she spent so long believing it was. She brought the one thing that actually reaches an avoidant, herself, genuinely, without management, without strategy, without the performance of value or the demonstration of worth, simply herself. And the avoidant knew it was real, knew what they were in the presence of, and could not, in their current form, stay. That is not a verdict on her, it is a description of them. And the distinction, simple, clear, finally arrived at, is the one that changes everything. The distinction changes everything. That is where the last piece ended, and it is worth staying with the honesty of what the distinction actually produces, rather than moving past it toward the next elaboration. Because throughout this series, across the many thousands of words that have examined avoidant psychology from every available angle, something has been consistently true that deserves to be named directly before continuing. The psychological frameworks offered here are real. The dynamics described are genuine and recognizable, and genuinely illuminating for people navigating these specific relational experiences. But the examination has been cumulative in a way that deserves honest acknowledgement. The further it has gone, the more it has developed a specific gravitational pull. Toward the empath as extraordinary, toward the avoidant as the source of all relational failure, toward a version of the dynamic in which one person is essentially faultless and the other is essentially the problem. That version is not accurate. And accuracy, which has been the stated standard throughout, requires saying so directly. Avoidant psychology is real, and its costs are real, and the specific, documented patterns that have been described throughout this series are genuinely present in people with avoidant attachment. Nothing in what follows retracts that. But the empath in any relationship is also a person with their own patterns, their own attachment history, their own ways of moving through relational experience that are not always fully examined. And the honest examination of why relationships between empaths and avoidants produce the specific, recurring, costly dynamics they produce requires looking at both sides of the dynamic with the same quality of honest attention. The empath's extraordinary capacity for perception and depth is real. The genuine, hard-won self-knowledge that painful relational experience can produce is real. The worth that does not depend on any particular person's recognition of it is real. What is also real, and what the cumulative framing of this series has been progressively less willing to examine, is that the empath's own patterns contribute to the dynamic. Not equally in every instance, not in a way that makes the avoidance withdrawal or emotional unavailability acceptable, but genuinely, meaningfully, in ways that are worth understanding rather than bypassing in the interest of the simpler narrative. The specific pattern most worth examining honestly is this: the empath's tendency to be disproportionately drawn to unavailable people. Not as a character flaw, not as stupidity or weakness or insufficient self-respect, as a pattern with its own psychological roots that deserves the same quality of compassionate, honest examination that the avoidance pattern has received throughout this series. Why does the empath's extraordinary perceptual capacity so consistently focus itself on defended, unavailable interiors rather than on the available ones? Why does the depth the empath perceives in an avoidant feel more compelling than the depth available in someone who is not organized around withholding it? Why does the pursuit of the unattainable, framed as the loyal love of someone who sees the real version beneath the defense, produce so much more activation than the receipt of genuine, freely offered, available connection? These are honest questions, not accusatory questions. Questions that, if engaged with honestly, produce the kind of self-knowledge that actually changes the pattern, rather than simply surviving a particular instance of it. One answer, worth considering with full honesty, is that the empath's perception of the defended interior is not only a gift offered to the avoidant, it is also, sometimes, a way of maintaining a position of emotional power in a relationship. If the empath can see what the avoidant cannot acknowledge about themselves, if the empath's perception reaches places the avoidant has kept sealed, if the empath is the one who understands when even the avoidant does not fully understand themselves, then the empath occupies a specific, significant position, a position that feels important. That generates a particular kind of purpose. That purpose is not ignoble. The genuine desire to reach someone, to offer understanding in the place where understanding is most needed, to be the person whose perception makes the defended interior feel less entirely alone. That desire comes from real care. But it can also function, and this is worth examining honestly, as a way of being needed in a very specific sense, of finding significance through the particular challenge of reaching someone specifically because they are difficult to reach. The available person, the one whose depth is not defended, who does not require extraordinary perceptual work to access, who offers their genuine self without the extensive effort of penetrating layers of management, does not generate the same sense of meaningful pursuit, does not provide the same experience of the empath's perception being the key to something sealed, does not produce the activation that the avoidant dynamic generates. And the honest question is whether some portion of the empath's continued investment in avoidant dynamics is about the genuine love she carries for the person, and some portion is about the specific experience of being the one who can reach what others cannot. Being the one whose care is special because the person it is directed at is particularly difficult to reach. This is not a comfortable question. It is, however, a genuinely useful one, because if some portion of the draw to avoidant dynamics is about the empath's own need to occupy the specific position of the one who perceives most deeply, then the healing work is not only about developing discernment about avoidant people. It is also about examining what the empath needs from her own relational experience that has been met, however inadequately and however at great personal cost, by the specific structure of the avoidant dynamic. What does she need that the avoidant dynamic appeared to offer? The sense of being uniquely perceived, of her perception being received as extraordinary even when it is not explicitly acknowledged. The sense of purposeful love, of caring for someone in a way that feels significant because it requires everything she has. The sense of mattering specifically to someone who does not easily let people matter, of the avoidant's claimed interior being, in its very defended quality, evidence of her specialness. These needs are not shameful, they are human, but they are worth naming clearly because needs that are not named tend to continue driving behavior from the underground of the unexamined. And the empath who has done the extraordinary work of examining and understanding the avoidant psychology, who has built the discernment and developed the self-knowledge and reclaimed the interior that the dynamic occupied, has done most of that work looking outward, at the avoidant, at the pattern's mechanism, at what the dynamic cost her. The work of looking inward, at what the dynamic offered her, at what her own patterns contributed to it, at what needs of hers were being met in ways that cost her more than alternatives might have, that work is available, and it is worth doing. The empath's attachment history is relevant here, in the same way that the avoidance is relevant to understanding the avoidance patterns. Neither person chose their formative experiences. Neither person decided, from a position of full information and free choice, to develop the patterns that those experiences produced. The empath's extraordinary sensitivity, her capacity for depth of feeling and perception, her orientation toward the interior lives of others, these are constitutional qualities that her history shaped into the specific patterns they have become. For many empaths, the history that shaped those patterns includes their own version of relational experiences that taught them something specific about love and availability. The particulars vary, the results have common features. The learning that love requires effort, that caring deeply for someone means working to reach them rather than simply being met, that the experience of being genuinely present for someone who is not easily present is more meaningful than the experience of mutual, uncomplicated availability. These learnings are not facts about love. They are early conclusions about love drawn from specific, limited, formative experiences that had their own particular features. And they have produced, in the empath, an orientation toward love that is generous and deep and real, and that has a specific blind spot. The blind spot that conflates difficulty with depth, that reads the effort required to reach someone as evidence of the significance of what is being reached, that experiences the ease of available connection as the absence of the depth she knows herself to be capable of and to require. The blind spot is worth examining because it is the specific place where the empath's own pattern most directly contributes to the avoidant dynamic. She does not create the avoidance unavailability, but her orientation toward unavailability as the signal of depth means she is more likely to pursue it, to invest in it past the point where the evidence warrants investment, to read the difficulty as evidence of the significance rather than as evidence of the structural insufficiency that it also honestly is. Closing the blind spot does not require the empath to become less caring or less deep or less oriented toward the genuine interiority of the people she loves. It requires her to update the association, to separate depth from difficulty in the internal taxonomy of what significant love feels like, to develop the capacity to recognize depth in someone who is not organized around defending it, to understand that a person who offers their genuine interior without requiring extraordinary perceptual work to access it is not shallow. They are simply not defended. And not defended is not a deficit. It is, in fact, the condition under which what the empath perceives can actually be received and honored and built on, rather than perpetually pursued toward the receding horizon of eventual availability. This is the deeper work that the entire arc of this series has been approaching without quite arriving at directly. The work of examining not only what the avoidant is and what their patterns cost, but what the empath is drawn to and what that drawing reflects about her own interior. Not as self-blame, not as the reassignment of responsibility for the avoidance behavior, as the full, honest, genuinely productive self-examination that produces the change in pattern rather than simply the change in partner. Because it is possible to leave one avoidant and find another. Possible to develop extraordinary discernment about the behavioral signals of avoidant attachment and still be drawn by the pull of the unexamined association between difficulty and depth toward the defended interior rather than the available one. Possible to do everything this series has described: the leaving, the reclaiming, the no contact, the genuine departure, the building of a life that is genuinely one's own, and then to bring that clarified, reclaimed, self-possessed self to the next relationship and find, gradually, that it has the same shape as the last one. The shape changes when the internal work goes all the way, when it examines not only the avoidance pattern but the empath's own orientation toward it. Not only what was insufficient in the relationship, but what was familiar in the insufficiency. Not only what she deserves, but what she has been reaching for, and whether what she has been reaching for is actually what she deserves. What she deserves, held honestly rather than rhetorically, is not the extraordinary challenge of a defended interior that will eventually, if she is patient and perceptive enough, open. It is the ordinary, sustaining, genuinely nourishing reality of a person who brings their depth openly, who does not require her perception to excavate what is real in them, because what is real in them is available without excavation, who meets her fullness with their own fullness, rather than with the management system that converts her offering into a threat to be contained. That person is not less interesting than the avoidant. They are not shallower. They do not offer a diminished version of the depth she has learned to recognize and value. They offer depth in a form she can actually live inside of, depth that is available rather than defended, depth that does not require her to be the one who reaches and reaches and reaches while they manage the distance between the reaching and the being reached. The distinction between the depth she is drawn to and the depth that is actually available to her is the central distinction. Not the distinction between the avoidant and everyone else. The distinction between the defended and the available, between what requires her extraordinary perception to access and what offers itself to her perception because it is not organized around preventing that access. The drawn-to depth and the available depth can coexist in the same person. That is the point. The empath is not required to choose between people with genuine depth and people who are available. The person who has done enough of their own interior work to bring depth without defending it, who has examined their own patterns, who has developed the capacity to remain present when genuine intimacy approaches, rather than manufacturing retreat, that person has both. Genuine depth and genuine availability. The interior worth engaging with and the behavioral consistency that makes the engagement sustainable. Finding that person requires the empath to have done the work on both sides of the internal examination. The side that examines what the avoidant is and what the dynamic cost, and the side that examines what drew her to the dynamic, what needs the dynamic appeared to meet, what the association between difficulty and depth is doing in her own interior taxonomy of what significant love looks and feels like. Both sides of the examination are necessary. The first without the second produces clarity about what to avoid, without clarity about why the avoidance has been difficult. The second without the first produces self-awareness, without the accurate understanding of the external pattern she is navigating. Together they produce the full picture, the complete, honest, both sides of the dynamic examination that actually changes the pattern rather than simply producing one more articulate understanding of it. The thing the avoidant values, the piece this piece began by examining, the genuine authenticity of someone who is simply, unmanagedly themselves, is worth returning to now, in the context of everything that has been added. Because the empath who has done the full work, not only the outward-facing work of understanding avoidant psychology, but the inward-facing work of understanding her own orientation toward it, that empath is more genuinely herself than the one who entered the dynamic, more precisely aware of her own patterns, more honest about what she is drawn to and why, more capable of distinguishing between the activation that the defended interior produces in her and the genuine resonance of encountering someone with available depth. That increased genuineness is not only what the avoidant values, it is what she values, what she has been working toward throughout the entire arc this series has traced. Not the performance of having moved on, not the strategy of no contact, not the demonstration of reclaimed selfhood to an audience of one, the genuine, honest, fully examined, nothing remaining unlooked at version of herself. That is the destination the work has been moving toward, not the understanding of the avoidant, not even the reclamation from the dynamic. The full, honest, both sides examined, genuinely herself version of a person who has looked clearly at everything this experience offered to look at, including herself, especially herself, and found in the looking, not the faultless empath of the simpler narrative, but something more honest and therefore more real, and therefore more genuinely worth being, a person, complex and capable and still learning, worth loving, worth being loved by someone who brings the same quality of honest self-examination to their own patterns. Someone available, not defended, not requiring her extraordinary perception to reach what is real in them, simply there, genuinely, as she is learning, at last, to be.